Close your eyes. Time is slowly flowing backward. We are embarking on a journey where the noise, the rush, and the modern world are left behind. Throughout this video, we will tell you how an empire established order, how knowledge flowed silently within the palace walls, how power was felt without shouting, and why a civilization is remembered for centuries. More than the gold-adorned halls, you will hear how life was lived there, how the days began, and how the nights ended. There is no war here, no shouting, only order, rhythm, and continuity. Throughout this narrative, we will look together at the founding of the Abbasid Palace, its daily life, its relationship with knowledge, the people within the palace, and the silent labor behind this splendor. Now, slow down your mind, exhale, and let's step through the gate of the Abbasid world. The birth of the Abbasid Palace. The Abbasid Palace was not a structure that appeared out of nowhere. This structure was not the result of hastily built splendor, but of an order that matured over time. The Abbasids, who were established after the Umayyads, brought not only a new administration, but also a different perspective. The center shifted from Damascus to the east. The new capital became Baghdad. Baghdad was not a random, it was at a point where trade routes intersected, cultures met, and rivers gave life. And right at this center, not just a palace, but a system was built. The Abbasid Palace was the heart of administration, the dwelling place of knowledge, and a place where the mind of the state worked silently. The walls were not just stone, they held the echo of decisions. The corridors were not just passage, the pulse of the state beat there. Here, life was bound to a certain rhythm. Every task, every movement, every word was arranged in a sequence. Who would stand where? Who would speak when? Who would pass through which door? Everything was predetermined. The power of the Abbasid Palace came not from ostentation, but from control. It was silent but effective. It appeared simple but was profound. The palace's architecture reflected this understanding. Wide courtyards, high arches, repeating patterns, all created an order that did not tire the mind and calm the gaze. There were also people living within this order: administrators, scribes, scholars, servants. They were all part of the same structure, but each undertook a different function. Life in the Abbasid Palace was like a flowing river. No one hurried. Everything happened on time. And this order endured for centuries. In the next chapter, I will describe the daily rhythm of this palace, how the mornings began, and where the first movements were made. Now, slow your breathing a little more. The story is just beginning. In the Abbasid Palace, time wasn't measured solely by hours. Here, time was a slow, deliberate flow of patience, thought, and knowledge. The silence that rose within the palace walls was consciously separated from the chaos of the outside world. For this structure was not only a center of administration, but also a sanctuary where thought was preserved. One of the most striking aspects of the palace during this period was the value placed on science and learning. The Abbasid caliphs realized very early on that power was sustained not only by armies, but also by intellect. Therefore, the great libraries established near the palace became places where knowledge from different geographies was gathered. Texts from ancient Greece, India, and Persia were reread, translated, and preserved here. The steps of a scholar walking through the palace corridors were not hasty, for here depth, not speed, was important. The parchments opened under the lamps did not merely carry writing. They whispered the accumulated knowledge of humanity, stretching from the past to the future. Even conversations were held in hushed tones in this environment. Respect for knowledge began with silence. In the daily life of the Abbasid Palace, order prevailed over ostentation. Ceremony certainly existed, but true power lay not in grandeur, but in continuity. Palace officials, librarians, scribes, and advisors all were small but indispensable parts of a grand structure. No one rushed, for here everything had its time. While Baghdad grew larger outside, life within the palace proceeded with greater balance. The sound of flowing water in the gardens accompanied moments of contemplation. This sound was designed not only to provide coolness, but also to calm the mind. In Abbasid architecture, nature was not an oppressive element, but a companion that balanced humanity. In this section, we realize that the Abbasid Palace was not merely made of stone and walls. It was a world where knowledge breathed slowly, where thought was not rushed, and this calm order was one of the quietest reasons for the empire's longevity. Life in the Abbasid Palace wasn't confined to the halls where major decisions were made. The real story lay hidden in the often inconspicuous areas, in the daily routines. For the palace inhabitants, each day began with a predetermined order. This order was maintained not by strict rules, but by habits and silent acceptance. Early in the morning, a slow movement began in the palace kitchens. Fires were lit, copper vessels carefully arranged. The aim here was balance, not speed. Food was prepared for continuity, not for show. Everyone working in the palace knew that their work was not limited to themselves. Even the smallest task was part of the larger structure. Later in the day, scribes and clerks retreated to their areas. Ink was prepared, reed pens checked. Writing wasn't considered an ordinary task. Every line was a trace left for the future. Therefore, there was no rush during writing. Words were carefully chosen. Silence was not a necessity here, but a natural consequence. For those who wandered in the inner courtyards of the palace, time flowed differently. As shadows lengthened, the footsteps echoing on the stone floors slowed. People avoided speaking loudly, preferring to communicate through glances. In this environment, calmness had become a learned behavior. The rhythm of the palace would slow people down without them even realizing it. Those who worked in the Abbasid Palace not only performed their duties, they also learnt to be a part of this environment. A newcomer would quickly adapt to this order, because here, conformity was valued more than attracting attention. Ostentation was replaced by silence. Towards sunset, the atmosphere of the palace softened even more. As the lamps were lit, a warm light filled the interiors. This light calmed not only the space, but also the thoughts. For those living in the palace, the evening hours were the most serene moments of the day. Conversations decreased, and movements became more measured. In this section, we see that the Abbasid Palace was not only a center of power, it was also a space where one could withdraw and gather one's thoughts. The slowness of daily life was consciously preserved, because in this palace, continuity was more valuable than haste. And this tranquil order became one of the most important elements that kept the Abbasid court alive, not only in history books, but also in memories for a long time. As evening approached in the Abbasid Palace, the meaning of the space gradually changed. The halls, bustling with activity during the day, transformed into spaces of contemplation and tranquility at night. Crowds gave way to fewer people, and sounds faded away before echoing off the walls. At this hour, the palace was like a large structure withdrawn into itself. Light was one of the most important elements of the night. Lamps were not placed randomly. Each was positioned to soften the shadows. The brightness did not strain the eyes. On the contrary, it made the environment calmer. The decorations on the walls attracted less attention in this dimness, and the space itself came to the forefront. People spoke less and thought more in this atmosphere. The steps of those walking in the palace corridors were slow. There was no haste, because at this hour, speed was seen as discord. Even the officials moved more measuredly, silently performing their duties. Here, night was a moment of pause. The burden of the day was slowly shed. Nights in the Abbasid Palace were not only a time for rest, they were also a process of mental recuperation. In some rooms, texts were read aloud. Some sat alone. Others engaged in short, quiet conversations. The conversations were deep but gentle. Raising one's voice was almost considered impolite. At these hours, the palace was almost completely cut off from the outside world. The noise from outside was lost behind the thick walls. Inside, only breathing, the gentle rustling of fabrics, and the occasional sound of a burning lamp could be heard. This silence was not disturbing. It was reassuring. As the night progressed, the spaces became even simpler. Large halls emptied, and smaller rooms came to the forefront. People retreated to places where they felt more comfortable rather than large spaces. This gave the feeling that the palace showed a different face at every hour. In this respect, the Abbasid Palace was not only magnificent but also measured. It maintained its existence not by displaying its power, but by preserving balance. The slowness of the night was one of the most important elements that nourished this balance. As we have seen in this section, the night in the palace was not an end, it was a natural continuation of the day. Everything was calmer, softer, and more controlled. Time here didn't flow, it seemed to glide by. In the Abbasid Palace, the late hours of the night marked a time completely devoid of crowds. At this time, the palace was no longer a center of administration, but a vast space where people were left alone with their inner voices. The spaces used during the day took on a different meaning at night. The walls were the same, the ceilings were the same, but the atmosphere felt was completely different. At this hour, everyone in the palace acted not according to their location, but according to their mood. Some sat in a quiet corner after a long day, others walked slowly through the courtyard. No one hurried, because the night itself, with its slowness, for the people living in the Abbasid Palace, night was not just about rest. This period was a time for thoughts to gather, for the mind to calm down. The decisions made, conversations held, and faces seen during the day took on new meaning in this silence. People felt that they could think without speaking at this time. Even the objects in the palace rooms were perceived differently at night. A curtain that was inconspicuous during the day appeared softer in the lamplight at night. The patterns on the carpets would lose their distinctiveness and the atmosphere would become simpler. This simplicity would also simplify the mind. Some rooms would have people sitting alone. Some would silently study a text. Others would simply be lost in thought. The important thing here wasn't to do something, but to not force anything. The night required no effort. Everything was accepted as it was. Even the palace officials would enter a different rhythm at these hours. Movements would soften, conversations would turn into whispers, doors would open slowly, steps would be taken consciously and lightly. This silence was the result of a shared understanding rather than a rule. In the Abbasid Palace, these deep moments of the night created an invisible bond between the place and the people. The palace would no longer be just a structure of stone and walls, but a space that carried the emotions of those within. Every breath, every pause would exist without being lost within this grand structure. At these hours, the existence of the outside world was almost forgotten. The noise, anxieties, and expectations of daily life remained outside these walls. Inside, only tranquility reigned. Time didn't press, the hours didn't rush. The night in the Abbasid Palace reminded one of this. Power doesn't always come from movement. Sometimes stillness, sometimes silence, sometimes doing nothing is also a form of balance. This balance was one of the invisible elements that allowed the palace to stand for centuries. And as the night progressed, this grand structure would gradually fall into a state of rest. The lights would dim further, the spaces would simplify, and people would retreat into their own inner rhythms. The palace didn't sleep, but it became silent. Like a living being, it remained in a state of tranquil existence throughout the night. The silence of the Abbasid Palace was not confined to its grand structure. As night fell, this tranquility was felt far beyond the reach of the empire. For the caliphate was not merely a center, but the heart of a vast, geographically expansive system. This system was bustling during the day and pensive at night. As one moved away from Baghdad, life in different cities flowed at its own rhythm. Each city, though under Abbasid rule, possessed its own unique silence. In some places, markets closed early. In others, people contented themselves with brief greetings instead of long conversations at night. This diversity demonstrated that the empire was built not on a single voice, but on a harmonious multiplicity. The caliphate stood at the center of this vast structure. However, this power did not need to be constantly visible. Often its presence was felt and acknowledged. Agreements were made, relationships established, and letters written were all part of a quiet order. Not every decision was loudly proclaimed. Some only came into being through implementation. The Abbasid administration valued balance in its relations with different regions. Trade routes were kept open, and cultural exchanges were fostered. This allowed for the transfer of not only goods, but also ideas between cities. People, without realizing it, became part of the same system. Of course, things didn't always go smoothly. Disagreements arose in some regions, and some administrations tried to push their boundaries. However, even these situations were generally handled quietly. Negotiations were held, representatives were sent, and matters were left to time. There was no rush, because time was a crucial tool in the Abbasid system. For the people, this vast empire was a natural part of daily life. People went to work in the morning and returned home in the evening. The presence of the administration was felt without disrupting daily life. Taxes, regulations, and rules were established not through harsh interventions, but through habit. For someone living in a distant city, Baghdad might have been an unfamiliar place, but the impact of the decisions made was felt there as well. This impact manifested itself not as oppression, but as order. People had learned to exist within this structure without experiencing major changes in the flow of their lives. As night fell, each of these cities would fall into its own silence. In one place, a lamp would burn. In another, the streets would be completely deserted. But there was a common feeling that united them all. The day was over, and there was nothing left to rush about. The Abbasid Empire, in this respect, was remarkable not only for its vastness, but also for its pace. At these hours, when everything slowed down, people felt themselves to be small but meaningful parts of a larger order. This feeling brought with it a sense of security, and as the night progressed, these silences in different parts of the empire became similar. Even if the geography changed, the feeling of tranquility remained the same. For the people, this vast empire was a natural part of daily life. People went to work in the morning and returned home in the evening. The presence of the administration was felt without disrupting daily life. Taxes, regulations, and rules were established not through harsh interventions, but through habit. For someone living in a distant city, Baghdad might have been an unfamiliar place, but the impact of the decisions made was felt there as well. This impact manifested itself not as oppression, but as order. People had learned to exist within this structure without experiencing major changes in the flow of their lives. As night fell, each of these cities would fall into its own silence. In one place, a lamp would burn, in another, the streets would be completely deserted. But there was a common feeling that united them all. The day was over, and there was nothing left to rush about. The Abbasid Empire, in this respect, was remarkable not only for its vastness, but also for its pace. At these hours when everything slowed down, people felt themselves to be small but meaningful parts of a larger order. This feeling brought with it a sense of security. And as the night progressed, these silences in different parts of the empire became similar. Even if the geography changed, the feeling of tranquility remained the same. In the Abbasid Empire, it was as if people breathed during these calm hours, began a new day, and prepared for it. In the Abbasid world, nights were not merely a time for rest. When the day's activity slowed, thought took center stage. In buildings not far from the palace, quiet work continued under the lamps. These spaces were neither ostentatious nor crowded, but within them the empire's deepest ideas took shape. In some rooms the rustling of papers could be heard. Scribes patiently copied texts, making small notes between the lines. This work was not done hastily, because in the Abbasid understanding, knowledge was not something to be consumed quickly, but a journey that unfolded over time. A text would sometimes remain on the same table for weeks, sometimes months. Scholars were not alone. People from different geographies met in the city. Their languages were different, but what was discussed was similar. The sky, numbers, time, and the place of man, these topics were not debated aloud. Most of the time they were simply listened to, contemplated, and then expressed in short sentences. The palace itself was not detached from this world of thought. The caliphate was concerned not only with governance, but also with the preservation of knowledge. However, this interest was not in the form of pressure, but of support. Spaces were provided for studies, travel was facilitated, and texts were preserved. The direct traces of this intellectual world were not visible on the streets of the cities. The people continued their daily lives, but unknowingly, they experienced the results of this silent production. Calendars became more regular, trade became more predictable, and the concept of time became clearer. In this respect, the Abbasid Empire was not only a vast but also a deep structure. Its power came not only from visible structures but also from invisible labor. These silent studies, which continued throughout the night, shaped the future of the empire. In the late hours of the night, the lamps would go out one by one. Even if the writings were not completed, they were left unfinished, because weariness was the enemy of thought. Rest was also part of this system. Knowledge was digested along with sleep, and towards dawn, the city would slowly fall silent. At those moments, the Abbasid world reached its calmest state. No decisions were made, no orders were given. Only the passage of time was felt. It is impossible to describe the Abbasid world with a single scene, because this empire lived in many places, in many lives, simultaneously. There were invisible links between the decisions made in the palace and a dinner in a distant town. These links were established not by noise, but by continuity. The light seeping through a window in Baghdad at night and a small oil lamp burning at another end of the empire were part of the same order. People didn't think about it, but it made them feel it. The regular flow of time, the calm nights, the feeling of waking up with confidence the next day. The Abbasid Palace was at the center of this feeling. It had its ostentatious moments, but its real power lay in its silence. Footsteps moving within the walls did not rush. Every step was taken with the long term in mind, because this structure was built not on momentary gains, but on continuity. Life in different regions of the empire was not alike. Deserts, riverbanks, mountain slopes, each place had its own rhythm. But when night came, these differences softened. People stopped, rested, thought, and prepared for the next day. The Abbasid legacy is not measured solely by the structures built. The true legacy lies in this understanding of tranquility, the idea that power can exist without shouting, that knowledge can grow without haste. This understanding has been remembered for centuries. Today, looking at this world from afar, one should think not of grand events, but of small moments. Lines read under a lamp, slow steps taken on a quiet street, the peace felt in the late hours of the night. And now, at the end of this long journey, as the Abbasid nights are left behind, only one feeling remains. When time slows down, the world becomes more understandable. If you have found your own rhythm in this calm narrative, this journey doesn't have to end here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and become part of this serene series to continue with these kinds of quiet historical stories. Now you can let your thoughts run free, leave the day behind, and allow yourself to rest in this silence.